Okay, is that better? That's scary. You don't know what a blessing it is to see all of you here coming out on a cold day like this, bringing Tony. You know, he flew in. He had Alaskan dogs get him across Texas and into Oklahoma, and then he walked the rest of the way. But this has been a long time coming. Bailey and I started this vision 3 years ago, and this year it came to fruition. Tony Hoffman is definitely one of the foremost speakers in mental health and addiction, and we're quickly becoming friends, and he's understanding Kansas rapidly and its weather. So without further ado, I want to introduce my friend, my brother, Tony Hoffman.
Morning. So I'm in my 13th year doing this. Still feels like the first time. Still don't like to eat breakfast because my nerves get going, which reminds me of competing when I race BMX, and I've learned that I feed on that. I was telling Seth that last night in the car. I really feed on the adrenaline that I get from being in front of a crowd, sharing my story, and there's a connection between that and me being an athlete all of my life. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. When I first started doing this, I just wanted to tell my story. That was it. I want to tell my story, and I want to try to use my story as a way to inspire people, specifically young people. When I started doing this, I was 25 years old. So I connected really well with high school students that weren't too far away from my age group. And then I started maturing, and then I started getting deeper into my recovery, and I started understanding a lot more mechanics behind what was actually happening, when I was using, why I was using, how I'd gotten to the places that I've gotten to. And then I got an opportunity to present on the TEDx stage. By a show of hands, is anybody in here? I know one person said they've seen my TED Talk. By a show of hands, have you seen my TED Talk? Okay, there's a few of you in here that have seen it. When I gave my TED Talk, I was still in this position where the basis of the talk was to break the stigmas of addiction, but it was to use my story to confront these belief systems or ideas that people held about people like me that struggled with addiction, and then present to them this story in which I overcame or broke every myth or belief system that people held about people like ourselves or myself if you're in recovery or struggle with addiction. And then shortly after that, I had a breakthrough in therapy. I had a breakthrough in therapy in 2018, which completely shifted what I was doing with this microphone. Because I was no longer telling my story, I was now trying to speak about these deep mechanics that were being completely misunderstood by societies, completely being misunderstood by communities, and completely being misunderstood by controlling agencies that oversee the communities and societies that we live in. And I wanted to use my life story now to present these deeper mechanics to try and change the way that people approach what it means and what it is to work with somebody like myself, or provide the proper type of help to somebody that's struggling with addiction. And furthermore, it's been more about connecting mental health to substance use than anything else. I remember years ago listening to Dr. Drew, who has long been heralded one of the smartest individuals when it comes to working with people who struggle with addiction. In an interview, he said, there are some individuals who just use substances and become addicted, and that is the basis for their addiction. And I strongly believe that that is incorrect. And I also would love to sit down with him and see if he has changed his ideas about the mechanics that he presented in that interview, because I believe every individual who finds themselves struggling with addiction first starts with an emotional imbalance, and that the idea behind the addiction being created is actually behind the person habitually taking a substance to to relieve themselves of an emotional imbalance they feel, and that process this individual is going through is actually very normal for a human being to do, because every human being in here is trying to survive. Part of our survival tactics is to regulate ourselves emotionally. And sometimes we find ourselves in this position where what we use or do to regulate ourselves emotionally, on the other side of it, is an addiction. And there is a component to those that are like myself that have a different brain mechanism in which the addiction occurs than it may not in somebody else. So when I start my speech, I now start it with the same thing that you heard from a TED Talk. Imagine being in a downtown district and you see a homeless person who's leaning over in the gutter. As you're walking by this individual, you notice they're using a needle inside this gutter to draw the water, and you make this connection that this individual is going to draw gutter water to cook fentanyl or heroin. Now my question is, where did that person's life start? What did their house look like? Mom and dad present? Where'd they go to school? Did they graduate high school? Did they go to college? Did they ever have gainful employment? Once we understand or visualize the beginning of this person's life, now imagine what the 10 years after this encounter looks like. Do they find sobriety? Do they go to jail, prison? Do they get a job somewhere? Do they go to college? If they didn't go to college, do they go to college at some point? Or do they become the statistic of another opioid overdose in the United States? What I've been doing for the last 13 years is trying to shift the perspective about this individual. Because the stigma says that this individual chose that lifestyle. There are individuals, and we see them all the time on the internet now that everybody can have an opinion without you knowing who it is that these people chose that. So they should be the bearer of their choices, and that we should leave them there. And let Darwin take care of the problem itself by letting them kill themselves. There are people that say they lack willpower. The individual that believes that this person lacks willpower is almost always the person that at some point in their life drank alcohol, did some cocaine, maybe popped some pills, broke their arm and had an OxyContin prescription, and their life didn't get taken over by an addiction. And so they believe, because their reality was completely different than the individual that we're talking about, that their reality must be their reality, and because the realities are the same, but the result is different, that something is wrong with the individual who ended up struggling with addiction. It was simply based on they don't know their limits. I hear it all the time. I know my limits. Wine drinkers, beer drinkers. I know my limits. No, you don't. Your brain just doesn't function like mine. You just don't have this function in your brain that tells you keep going, that doesn't let you stop. And you believe sometimes that your reality has to be everybody else's reality, and if somebody else doesn't fit into your reality, something is wrong with them. Maybe it's not something wrong with them, maybe it's something wrong with our perspective when we hold that type of belief system. There are individuals that say, this person should never be allowed to have gainful employment. Do that by when this individual does make a decision to course correct their life and get on a path where they want to do the right things and be a functioning part of society. They go to get a job, but they can't get the job because they have to check a box that they've been arrested. One of the things that Obama did that was great was he removed the ability for you to ask somebody if they've been arrested for a felony. Well, what did employers do? They stopped asking you if you've been convicted of a felony, and they just ask you, have you ever been arrested? Because if you've ever been arrested, we no longer can trust that you can be employed. Well, the problem that I have with individuals that hold this belief system or push this type of stigma on individuals like myself is you're also usually the person that says you chose that lifestyle, you should be the bearer of the choices, the consequences of the choices you've made. But what happens when I decide to change my choices? You're also the individual that then believes I can't be trusted to be employed because you're also the one that makes me check the box. So what is it? Am I the bearer of my choices? Or you just don't want to believe that people can change, or you're going to use them both to keep yourself safe and remove yourself from a moral duty to try and help individuals overcome their struggles. There are belief systems across all types when it comes to mental health and substance use. Many of us carry these belief systems because the homes we were raised in taught us them. The institutions that we were a part of confirmed them. But more importantly, what I've been trying to educate people on and speak about is the infrastructure that perpetuates it. It's really the infrastructure. And as I tell my story, really what I want to do is inspire individuals that are sitting in here today that may be in early recovery to help you connect with this thing that I connected within myself, is that I didn't go through all of this for no reason, and that when I went through this and I made it through the other side, I had a very specific purpose to then go out in the world and work tirelessly within this community of mental health and substance use to change the infrastructure, to strengthen the infrastructure. And there's individuals in here that are educators. There's individuals that are in here that are students. What I want to do is inspire you to think differently about infrastructure and how we can progress and evolve the infrastructure to make a bigger impact on mental health and substance use. Because right now, all across the United States, when I'm speaking to students in schools, I have never seen what I've seen this year. I have not seen it before. Students are dying on campus from fentanyl overdoses. Students are showing mental health struggles that I've never seen before. The inability to cope with their emotions and the stress that life seems to be bringing them, and what that's turning into with mental health. I grew up in the middle of California, and I tell people where I grew up, there's no beaches. 30% of the world's produce comes from a 200-mile radius around my house. I grew up in one of the ag capitals of the world. My backyard was an almond orchard for many years. Well, in this city that I grew up in, Clovis, is a school district called Clovis Unified. It was one of the top public schools in the United States. My parents moved to Clovis so me and my brother could get a good education from Clovis Unified. Well, Clovis Unified was not only known for their education system, they were also known for their sports programs. Back-to-back national baseball champions at Clovis High School. All the best wrestlers come from Clovis North and Clovis and Buchanan High School every single year in the United States. Nationally recognized softball programs, basketball programs. Well, when you were in Clovis, if you went to Clovis Unified, you also played sports. I started playing sports because I was a Clovis kid, and then I found out that I was gifted at every sport. Didn't matter what the sport was: basketball, baseball, soccer, rollerblades, skateboards, BMX bikes, volleyball, tennis. But my first dream, it was to go to the NBA. I told my dad I was going to graduate from the University of Michigan. After I graduated from the University of Michigan, I told my dad I was going to get drafted to the league. By the time I got to 6th grade, the high school coaches were coming to watch me run point guard. The middle school coaches were coming to watch me run point guard. It was really clear by the time I got to 6th grade that the short white kid from the middle of California could play basketball. But when I got to 7th grade, some things changed. Some things changed that people couldn't see, and they didn't know what was changing because I wasn't talking about it. And when I was in 7th grade in the mid-90s, we didn't talk about mental health, and we didn't encourage vulnerability. And that through vulnerability, we would be able to relate with other individuals, and through relating and vulnerability, we would actually create strength in numbers, because many of us would realize that we're suffering on the inside and that we need each other to comfort that suffering and encourage ourselves to move through these struggles and get to a place where we can live with them, not get over them. Because the idea of getting over things is a myth. What we end up doing at some point in our lives, for those of us that are getting in early recovery, is we don't get over things, we learn to live with things and manage them in a way that they don't control us anymore. So I wasn't talking about this experience that when I got to 7th grade, I had this overwhelming feeling that I needed to kill myself. I didn't know where it was coming from. The only thing I knew is that when I got to school, I felt extremely uncomfortable. Then I started having these thoughts that I needed to kill myself to stop this discomfort.
And the reason that I came to the conclusion that I needed to kill myself was I tried to stop myself from feeling what I was feeling. I couldn't stop myself from this feeling happening, and the more I tried to stop it, the more it seemed to just come back. The more it seemed to come back, and the more I tried to stop it and it wouldn't stop, the more I started looking at my peers and thinking to myself, something is wrong with me. My peers aren't feeling this. There's no way anybody that I'm around right now in society is feeling what I'm feeling right now. But I didn't know that because I never told anybody. And back in the mid-90s, if we would have told somebody about this, they would have labeled us the crazy person, because even having a therapist or a counselor back then made you the crazy person. So I internalized this entire process. And while I was internalizing this process, I was coming up with these very self-destructive belief systems about why I was experiencing this. One of my biggest struggles was before the basketball games would start, I would be sitting down in the chairs next to all my teammates, and I would look to the end of the gym doors. As I'm looking to the end of the gym doors, I'm having a conversation with myself about this experience I'm having with my father. I would say, "Come on, Dad. Come on, Dad. You promised me. You told me you were getting off of work this time." What I didn't understand at 12 years old was why all of my teammates' parents came through the doors. Jeff's mom came to every single game. Jose's mother and father were at every single game. Richie's mom and dad made it to every single game. My father was my hero. He didn't know that at the time, and I didn't either. It's taken a lot of work and therapy to understand the dynamic between the role my father played in influencing me into believing who I was in the world of what I was capable of doing. My mother, who I also love, is not my hero. I have never looked to my mother for encouragement, for empowerment, for comfort, for care, for anything. It doesn't mean that I don't love her, but my brother is different than me. My brother has reached to my mother for each of those dynamics. My mother is my brother's hero, but I'm looking for my father. And when my father doesn't come through these doors, I start to have this experience, these feelings of abandonment that start to show up. Because my dad keeps promising me that he's going to show up to these basketball games. And I get so excited at the idea of thinking my father, who I believe is the reason I'm going to get to the NBA, and my father, the reason I'm going to learn how to fail and learn how to win, is going to show up to provide to me these emotional needs that are very important to me. I didn't get to choose whether my father was going to be my hero or not. He was just the one. What I didn't understand at that time was that while I was having this experience, I would have these emotions that were attached to this experience. And then once I felt abandonment, I would then create a story about why these feelings and this experience was happening. At 12 years old, I had no idea that the story we create about our experiences is more important than the experience itself, because the story you create about your experiences that are very specific to you and your life are the reasons that you do what you do on a daily basis. So it's not about what happens to us, it's what we tell ourselves about what's happening to us and why it's happening to us that's more important, because that story is the reason that we do what we do on a daily basis. See, what I was doing at 12 years old was making a decision that my father didn't love me. That's why he's not coming through the doors. My dad doesn't care. That's why he's not coming through the doors. I'm not good enough. That's why he doesn't come through the doors. One of the biggest mistakes I made in my life was holding on to this experience and never telling anybody about it. Because when I did that, I became the person who decided what that experience meant. And once I created that belief system about myself, I then had to go do everything in my behavior to confirm what I believed about myself. There's only two types of belief systems in this world. I can, I will, and I'm able. Or I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able. The second one is not true for any person in this world. Only the first one is true. Because everybody can, everybody will, and everybody is able. But if you don't believe that, you can't do it. And once I made a decision that I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able, then I had to go do that in the world and have other people and circumstances prove to myself that you can't, you won't, and you'll never be able. I also never even sat down and talked to my father. It was one of the biggest mistakes I made. It was one of the biggest mistakes I made because I never said, Dad, I feel like you don't love me. That's why you're not coming to my basketball games. Dad, I feel like you don't care. That's why you're not coming to my basketball games. Or, Dad, I feel like I'm not as good as my teammates, and that's why you don't want to come and watch me play basketball. My dad would have turned around and then said, son, I'm working 14-hour days so we can go get you Michael Jordan shoes. Son, I'm working 14-hour days so you can have the best soccer equipment, the best baseball equipment. Son, your mother and father are working 14-hour days so you and your brother can have opportunities that we didn't get as children, so you can be more successful than your mother and father. Then I could have turned around and said, Dad, I love Michael Jordan shoes, but I don't think I can make it to the NBA if you don't come through the doors. I can make it to the NBA in Fila's if you come through the doors and you teach me all of the things that I need, but also show up for me and make me feel like I have value in this world. But that never happened. When I was a young kid, they said, stay away from kids who smoke, weed, and drink. It was very simple. Stay away from kids who smoke, weed, and drink, because bad people influence good people to do bad things. The idea of this concept that people are bad and they influence good people to do bad things is completely wrong. None of it's real, and none of it's true. See, in 2017, I was about to give a keynote speech at a national conference on addiction and mental health. I got a brochure, and on this brochure was a bunch of statistics. One of the statistics on there stuck out to me. I don't remember any of the other ones because they weren't as relevant or as important to me as the one statistic that I read on this brochure. It said 68% of kids who get involved in using nicotine products, alcohol, marijuana, and other drugs, 68% of them, if they started before the age of 14, have been sexually abused. It's almost a guarantee. And I think that that number is actually higher because we haven't really broken through this barrier of how common sexual abuse is on young individuals. Because there are many young individuals that don't ever say anything. They just keep it to themselves. The reason that this statistic is so important is because when I read this statistic, I started going back to my childhood and I started thinking about all the young people that started using or misusing substances at a very young age, and then I started connecting with what the infrastructure did to these individuals. In Clovis, we kicked them out of school. It was very simple. You're a bad kid, get out. But how wrong is that? Because if this individual is likely being sexually abused, maybe currently, or the victim of a past sexual abuse, that sexual abuse, their experience may have created shame, guilt. For those of us that are in the industry and working with individuals, anxiety disorders, extreme anxiety disorders. There's all types of emotions that are extremely uncomfortable that come with this event. And as a result of this event, it's created these emotions. This individual is now trying to survive through these uncomfortable emotions that if anybody in this world felt would try to regulate this experience, these emotions, and they find a substance. They find a substance that gives them some type of relief because nothing else seems to work. Because when you sit a young person down and you explain the idea behind therapy and doing these things that are positive coping skills that empower themselves over time, bring healing, it doesn't make sense to them because it's not helping them in the immediate. They're looking for something now that can help them. And they find this substance, a cigarette, a vape pen, smoking weed for the first time, maybe stealing alcohol out of their parents' cabinet. They feel and experience that relief, and that relief then starts to alter their behavior even more. So when they show up to school and they can't perform, or they show up to school and they're abusing these substances at school, we kick them out. And we confirm to them, you can't, you won't, and you'll never never be able, and something is wrong with you. And I promise you, a young person who experiences sexual trauma is blaming themselves, thinking that something is wrong with themselves, and wondering why that experience had to happen to them and nobody else. I had a guy in my treatment center 3 months ago. I was getting to know his story, and he told me what it was like to be tortured by his stepmother at 8 years old. His father would leave the home for extended periods of time. His stepmother would take out his father's behavior on him. She would strip him naked and tie him to the front of her bed and turn the air conditioner all the way down. If this young person went to sleep, she would pour ice cold water on him to make sure he couldn't go to sleep. And I said, "How did that make you feel?" He said, "Confused, angry." I said, "Why were you confused and why were you angry?" He said, "I was confused because I didn't understand why this person was doing this to me. I was angry because my father wasn't there to cut the ropes. Found alcohol at 10 years old. 12 years old, he was in a juvenile prison. We were labeling this young man a bad person, when in reality, he was experiencing stuff that we don't ever want to hear some people have to go through in life. Many people where I grew up wouldn't even believe that happens, because everybody was so perfect where I came from." I said, "Did you ever feel that again, this anger and this confusion?" Because really what I wanted to do is help him have a breakthrough between how anger and confusion may actually be the root cause of his use. When I feel anger or confusion, I relieve these feelings with a substance. It was like a mathematical equation. He said, "Yep." I said, "When was that?" He said, "When my daughter died." That I was so confused because I don't know why the world had to take my daughter. He said, "I was so angry because I had no control over the situation." And I told this person, "Do you see how your brain has made these two situations identical? Confusion by why something is happening, anger because there's a lack of control." Hadn't been sober a day since his daughter had died. It had been 15 years. He used alcohol to try and cope with that experience. It's so important for us to understand this dynamic, because right now the infrastructure is moving much slower than our understanding about how this works and how this plays out in young people's lives to start using substances to cope with their experiences. And if we don't stop doing what we're doing in terms of kicking some of these individuals out of schools that we know, based on statistics, are having things happen at their house that shouldn't be happening, then we're going to continue to confirm the belief system about themselves: "I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able." Because what we're really trying to do as a society, and what we really should be trying to do with the infrastructure, is change the belief system about the individual and what they think about themselves. At 12 years old, I made a decision. If my dad doesn't love me, he doesn't care, why should I? And immediately, after I accept that I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able, my behavior changed in school. I got kicked out of 7th grade for selling weed to a girl. I wasn't getting validated by my mother and father at home because they were workaholics. So then I showed up to school to try and get the second type of validation you can get. There's intrafamiliar, number one. There's institutional, number two. That's the schools you go to. And then there's a third, societal. Those are the three forms of validation that a human will try to achieve. I wasn't getting it at home, so I tried to achieve it at school. But because I wasn't getting it home and didn't have the structure I needed at home to teach me how to actually be validated within myself and then attach myself to other individuals who had healthy behaviors, I looked for a way to do it in an improper way, which was, I'll just get this girl weed. And by getting this girl weed, I could be a cool kid that's accepted by my peers. So I got her the weed, she got caught with it, and she told on me. I got kicked out of 7th grade. Shortly after this, I find a BMX bicycle. My mother and father said I had to go out to the BMX track on the weekends with my brother. He was already racing BMX at this time. My dad says, why don't you try racing? I'm 12 years old at this time. I said, all right, I'll try racing. By the time I'm 18, I'm on the cover of the largest BMX racing magazine in the world. I'm ranked #1 in the country in points. I'm sponsored by Fox Racing, Airwalk Shoes, and Spy Sunglasses. I'm sponsored by companies that don't sponsor amateur athletes, but they're sponsoring me because they believe that when I turn pro, I'm going to be one of the best in the sport. And most people would have said, don't worry about Hoff. He's going to go off, race BMX, and be super successful by my senior year in high school. But these people had no idea that when I took my helmet off, I wanted to kill myself. When I took my helmet off, I had anxiety issues. When I took my helmet off, my depression was so bad my senior year, I had Saturday school every single weekend. And my English teacher, she would tell you that the reason I showed up late to her class or didn't show up to her class at all was just because I was a punk. But what she didn't know is that the first drug I ever took for my mental health struggles was sleep. If I was asleep, I didn't have anxiety. If I was asleep, I didn't feel depressed. If I was asleep, I didn't have thoughts of killing myself. My mother and father spent their time at work. My dad drank a lot on the weekends. He was a binge drinker, alcoholic, but I didn't really have these behaviors that were modeled to me of how to teach myself to manage these emotions. So I taught myself. And the first thing I taught myself was just to sleep. I liked to sleep because when I was awake, I had to feel what I didn't want to feel, and that was to be me. So these people that saw me and thought that I had it all together had no idea that underneath the exterior that I was suffering to the point that in my senior year in high school, I hated my life more than anything else, but I had all of this stuff that people think that they wanted or stuff that made me great. I also didn't want to race BMX professionally. The average BMXer makes $10,000 to $15,000 a year. You make more money flipping burgers at McDonald's than you do racing a BMX bike. When I was younger, I thought that if I just made a lot of money, had a big house, nice car, good-looking wife, that all my problems that I was struggling with that people didn't know about would just magically go away. Then I found out that money ain't going to fix what people can't see. It's this commitment to this inward journey or this inward process in which you do this work, and over time, this work gets you to a place where you learn to live with the struggles that you were presented with in your life. So at 18 years old, I get offered this computer job to go work for this guy down in San Diego, California. Because see, what I was doing with my social anxiety was isolating away from people, spent time in my bedroom learning how to build corporate computer networks. This guy that I went to go work for when I graduated high school was Entrepreneur of the Year of California at 23 years old. He was known for starting million-dollar tech companies. He was inventing these 802.11b wireless internet radios that he was going to be the first person in the United States to put outside of these neighborhoods and beam wireless internet into these homes. He needed a network administrator. My aunt knew the guy's husband. My aunt knew the guy's wife, who connected me with him. He offered me $120,000 a year before I graduated high school. But he said, the day after you graduate, I need you to move down here. I'm going to stop the company. We're going to wait for you to graduate. Once you graduate, move down here the day after, and we'll start this company. When I knew I was going to go down and do this, I put my gift away. My gift was racing my bicycle. My gift was racing my bicycle, and what I tell people is you need two things to keep your mental wellness in check. One is a safe place to have a conversation. That means you can talk about whatever it is that you're experiencing or feeling, and on the other side of that conversation is understanding, compassion, care, empathy, encouragement, inspiration. You don't feel shame, you don't feel guilt, you don't feel anxiety, because you're able to release these uncomfortable emotions in a way that empowers us at the end. The other thing that we need is an activity that connects us with like-minded individuals. The catch is that activity has to be empowering for self and others. It's why the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous and these pews inside churches are so effective at helping people change their life and build them up, because everybody in these rooms is built on one accord, lifting each other up. It's connecting with other individuals in a like-minded way that's empowering for self and empowering for others. And it could be anything. It doesn't have to just be in these pews, and it doesn't just have to be in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. It can be racing a bicycle, playing sports. It could be doing makeup. It could be going to dog shelters. There's all types of ways to be empowered through these activities. I gave up the one thing that I had, was my activity. When I gave up racing the bicycle, the only thing I had was this: myself. I can't. I won't. I'll never be able. Everything I'd had in conversations within myself were self-destructive. So I started going to parties. I see people smoke weed and drink, and I told myself, I don't need to smoke weed. I don't need to drink, because I'm going to go make 6 figures down in San Diego. But I know this: the more I went to parties, the more I wondered. The more I went to parties, the more I hated who I was. I hated who I was because when the lights got flipped on, they tapped the keg, and the music got turned on, I wasn't smiling, dancing, and doing keg stands like everybody else. I was standing against the wall because of my social anxiety that wouldn't let me mince with everybody else. And so I started thinking more that something was wrong with me. Then the day came where I told my friend, I'm going to smoke weed for the first time. Smoke me out, bro, is what I told my friend Steve. I smoked weed for the first time. I couldn't stop laughing. I was having a good time. But it didn't help my anxiety. It didn't help my depression or my suicidal ideation. It was connecting me with like-minded individuals. But it wasn't empowering for self, and it wasn't empowering for the others. And I told myself, I don't want to smoke weed every single day like my friends do. Maybe I'll just smoke once a month. Well, the next weekend comes by, I get to a party. My friends circle up, they start smoking. They say, Hoff, you want to smoke? I said, yeah, I'll smoke. But I told myself, I don't want to smoke weed every single day like my friends do. Maybe I'll just smoke on the weekends. Wednesday comes by, we're playing on the Xbox. My friends circle up, they start smoking. They say, Hop, you want to smoke? I said, yeah, I'll smoke. Next thing you know, I was smoking weed every single day like my friends do. But it wasn't helping my anxiety. It wasn't helping my depression. So I went down to San Diego, California, just smoking weed is what I told myself. What I really didn't realize was I was opening this door, and in this door was this mechanism in which I would try to use people, places, and things to regulate my emotions, to get me to a place where I felt okay with how I was experiencing life emotionally. And once I opened that door to experiment changing the way that I felt, and if the weed didn't work, then I would try something else. Well, when I went down to San Diego, California, the computer job didn't work out because it turned out the guy I went to work for was wanted by the FBI for stealing $28 million. He was a Ponzi scheme scam artist. I found out many years later. Well, I blamed myself for this job not working out because my belief system, I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able, it shows up in every situation. So when something doesn't work out, I blame myself. I don't look at things with a bigger lens or different perspective. I always look at it as how I played a role in ruining what's not working out. So I quit and went back home to Fresno, California, Clovis, little city I grew up in. I kept going to parties. Then my friend calls me and he says, I got this pill. We need to try this pill. I said, what is it? He said, it's called Oxycontin. I said, what's that? He said, I don't know. The guy we buy our Vicodin from, he's out. He's got these new pills called Oxycontin. He said it's like Vicodin on steroids. You want to split one with me? And I said, yeah, I'll split one with you. I thought because it came out of an orange bottle, it was safe. Prescribed by a doctor, picked up at a pharmacy. Can't be that big of a deal. But then we found out sometimes the stuff that comes out of the orange bottle is no different than the stuff that comes from the cartel. It's just packaged different. And because it's packaged different, we thought it was safe. Then when I split this 80 milligram Oxycontin with my friend, something different happened. That something different that happens is as soon as the high hits me, no more anxiety, no more depression, no more suicidal ideation. I'm fixed. And I think to myself, why can't the doctors just give me this? You mean to tell me all I had to do is take half of this green pill and it goes away? Well, this is it. Like, I won't use this and commit crimes. I'm not going to use this and hurt anybody. I have been looking since I was 12 years old for the answer. I don't want Zyprexa. I don't want Thorazine. I don't want Seroquel. I don't want Paxil. I don't want lithium. I don't want Prozac. I don't want these drugs, these people that I sit down with for 15 minutes and they turn around and tell me that I'm bipolar, that I need to just take these 3 pills that make me feel like I don't have a soul. I don't want that. If I split half of this 80 milligram pill, I got energy, no more social anxiety. I have comfort within myself. Everything that I think each of you have, without ever having a conversation about what it is that you have or don't have, I now believe that I have what everybody else has, and that's being normal. So I started using Oxycontins, not realizing that Oxycontin was no different than heroin and fentanyl. It was just packaged different, and because it was packaged different, I thought it was safe. Then I found out when I stopped using Oxycontin, I was going to go through these withdrawals. And these withdrawals were like the worst flu times 100. The most powerful flu I've ever had, and the worst flu I've ever had because my mind went crazy. With the normal flu, my mind didn't go crazy because I knew in 7 days it was going to be over. And I didn't have this mechanism that existed with Oxycontin because, see, there wasn't a substance I could take that stopped the flu. I had to let it do its thing. But when I was withdrawing from Oxycontin, I knew if I could just get this pill or get this drug, flu was over. That's when you become willing to do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes looks different for every person that I've met. For me, at 21 years old, whatever it took was arming myself with a gun, entering a home while people were there, and the people that were in the house was one of my best friend's families. Myself and my co-defendants went inside this house and committed a home invasion robbery because we knew inside this house was Oxycontin. Our friend was stealing them from his mother originally. She had multiple sclerosis and was getting prescribed a bunch of these pills. He started selling them to us for dirt cheap, not realizing the stuff that came out of the orange bottles, sometimes the same stuff that comes from the cartel. It was just packaged different. Then she caught him and started locking him up. When she caught him and started locking him up, we had to buy these pills off the dealers on the street. But in the early 2000s where I was at, there wasn't enough people selling their prescriptions, and the pharmacies would run out of these pills. And when they ran out of these pills, we would have to go through the withdrawals because at this time we had no idea that heroin was the same thing and it was found on the other side of town for a quarter of the price. So we became willing to do something that is one of my only regrets in my life. That was arming myself with a gun and entering somebody's home and robbing it. I told myself when I left this house, I'll never rob somebody ever again, but my co-defendants couldn't say the same thing. They kept robbing people. They kept robbing people and ended up on the news when they got caught. When they got caught and ended up on the news, the lady we robbed saw my co-defendants on TV and said that guy was in my house. It started an investigation around all my friends. 6 months later, the cops found out where I was staying at, raided the place. He took me to jail for armed robbery. I hadn't seen my family in 3 years at this time. I haven't seen my family in 3 years at this time. I called my dad from Fresno County Jail and I said, Dad, I'm in jail for armed robbery. Can you help me? My dad says, I'm not helping you. What do you want me to do? This is your thing. You need to deal with it. I said, Dad, can you give me an attorney? Please, I don't want to go to prison. My dad says, I don't know who to get. I said, can you look up this guy, Michael Idiart? He looks up this guy, Michael Idiart, the next day. I call him. He says, son, this guy wants $30,000 to walk into a courtroom one time. We don't have that kind of money. He said, but your mother and I had a discussion. We're going to pull the money out of my retirement account. We're going to get you this attorney. Hopefully I can get my son back and you can get your life back. My dad thought at this time that addiction was simply a choice, and that if he saved me from the consequences of my choices, the 17 and a half years in prison that I was facing would wake me up to this reality that the drugs were not as fun as the consequences that came with the use. What my dad didn't understand was the drugs and my use were connected to my emotional wellness, and that I was trying to stop myself from feeling this torment or this nightmare that I had to live on a daily basis. And that my dad didn't understand that something was different about my brain, and that when I felt that and I kept going after that, my brain would then reach a point where it wouldn't let me live without thinking I had to have this drug with it and for me to be okay. So I went to courtroom with one of the best defense attorneys in the state of California. I went from facing 17 and a half years in prison to getting out on 5 years felony probation, 1 strike on my record, and 90 days in a treatment center. And I remember thinking to myself when I get sentenced, because Judge Nunez told me, Mr. Hoffman, if you come back in my courtroom for anything, I'm going to give you all 10 years that I'm supposed to be giving you right now. Do you understand me? I said, yes, sir. In my mind, I'm never coming back, because I think the 10 years that are over my head now while I'm on probation are going to stop me from using. Not understanding the mechanics behind my use was so much more powerful than consequences. It was so much more powerful than willpower. So I get out of treatment, and then I start going to parties again. But I'm just drinking this time because I don't have a drinking problem. I got a drug problem. Then I knocked this guy's tooth out in a fight. And 2 weeks later, I almost have to have my hand cut off in surgery. I show up to the hospital in the middle of the night because I can't clench a fist, can't bend my elbow, can't rotate my arm. I get to the hospital, show the lady my arm, and she says, oh my God, you should have been in surgery days ago. I said, why? She goes, look at your arm. It's fire engine right up to your bicep. The infection in your knuckle from knocking this guy's tooth out, not cleaning it enough, has shut your whole arm down. This infection's going to get to your heart and kill you. She goes, why didn't you come in sooner? I said, I thought it was going to go away. She goes, we need to call a surgeon in right now. They take me into a room. A nurse comes in and says, Mr. Hoffman, I'm going to administer a drug called fentanyl for the pain. At that time, I didn't know what fentanyl was. When they put it in my veins, I knew exactly what it was. Because opioids were the only thing that could make me feel that. And I want you, and for those of you that are in early recovery or maybe even in recovery or working on any type of, if you're like me, I will never let a doctor give me a narcotic medication ever again because of this experience. It doesn't matter how much pain I'm in. I had an ACL reconstructive surgery in 2011, and I had several years of sobriety, and I did not take one pain med. In fact, my surgeon didn't even think it was going to be possible because they were going to drill into my shin and my femur and anchor a new ligament in, and he told me the pain that I was going to experience was excruciating. Well, I told him, I'm not going to let what happened with my hand happen again with my knee. I really make a strong suggestion that if you're in a situation where narcotics are on the table because of a medical procedure, that you strongly look at other avenues, because when they gave me that fentanyl, my brain immediately was captured, and it went right back to obsessing about getting this dang drug to make me feel that. They did the surgery, cut the infection out of my hand. They sent me home at 21 years old with a Vicodin prescription. My mom says, I'm going to give you 1 pill every 4 hours, just like the bottle says, because you're a drug addict and you can't follow instructions. My mom thought that it was a choice. She simply thought the bottle says 1 pill every 4 hours. My son's a knucklehead, and he wants to know what happens when he takes 4 at once. What she didn't understand was now, after they gave me the fentanyl at the hospital, I'm obsessing about how I can get those pills from her to make myself feel that again. So 3 days later, she leaves the keys out to the closet. She's locking them in. I steal the keys in the middle of the night, open up the closet, get the pills, and I leave. And for the next 2.5 years, my life spins completely out of control. It spins completely out of control. I can no longer afford pills. I start using heroin, start rocking up cocaine and smoking crack, start using meth. Then I get introduced to the needle. When I get introduced to the needle, I don't want to use anything but the needle. I had one friend at my bottom. It was my best friend, Nate, and his family eventually had to remove me from his home, and I started sleeping on the street. When I started sleeping on the street, I had never felt so much hopelessness. I had never felt so much despair, so much fear, so much confusion. I did not think my life was going to change from when I was homeless. There was no possible way in my mind that it was going to get turned around. In fact, the first night that I slept at the high school I graduated from, before I threw this sleeping bag that my friend gave me when I left his house into the baseball stadium, I told myself, you're going to die soon. This is it. But on January 21st, 2007, I had a spiritual experience that led me to Christ. That experience that led me to Christ changed my life. It's the only reason I'm alive today. It's the only reason I'm doing what I'm doing today. I don't push my faith on anybody, but that's what happened. On January 21st, 2007, I broke into a house that was up for rent. On January 22nd, I wake up at 2 p.m., 4 cops in the room. They got their guns drawn on me. They arrest me and violate my probation for armed robbery. 30 days later, I'm sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. I get to Wasco State Prison at 10:30 at night. I'm on D yard, cell 254. I got the top bunk. I walk up the staircase and cut across the tier. I open up the cell door, close it behind me. I meet Dizzy, my cellmate. I started making my bed. After I made my bed, I jumped up on my bunk. At 11 p.m., they flipped the lights off. Before they flipped the lights off, I was reading this quote that somebody written in the ceiling with a pencil. It said, "Be careful what you think, because your thoughts become your words. Be careful what you say, because your words become your actions. Be careful what you do, because your actions become your habits. Be careful what you make a habit, because your habits become your character. And your character becomes your destiny." I kept reading it over and over and over. It made so much sense to me. I thought to myself, if this is the blueprint of how I ended up in here, then I can use this quote to completely re-engineer my life. The stories we create about our experience are more important than the experience itself, because the story you create is the thinking that becomes your speaking. Your speaking then becomes how you do things. How you do things becomes what you do on a daily basis, or your habits. And your habits and what you do on a daily basis is the reason things are happening the way that they are happening. So I thought to myself, I'm going to use this quote, and it's going to completely re-engineer my life. So I set 4 goals in a prison cell, 4 things I felt God was telling me I needed to do. 1, get back on my bicycle and race BMX professionally. 2, go to the Olympics. 3, start a program for kids. Call it the Free Will Project, and you're going to use action sports to work with at-risk kids. And 4, become a professional speaker. But I didn't know how I was going to go from a prison cell to the Olympics, because at that time there had never been a human being that started in a prison cell and made it to the Olympics. And then I was reading in the really big book called the Bible that if you could be trusted with little, you could be trusted with much. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? What it meant for me was at 23 years old in a California penitentiary cell, I couldn't brush my teeth every single day. And if I can't brush my teeth every single day, how would I ever be trusted with an event or something as big as the Olympics? So then I started this connection, and making this connection between how all the small things that most people think are very insignificant in life actually play a huge role in outcomes, so long as you assign an intention behind why you're doing what you're doing that most people don't think about. So for me, it wasn't about not getting cavities while I brushed my teeth. It was about how this was going to take me to the Olympics. The intention I assigned behind brushing my teeth was to go to the Olympics. Then I learned how to make my bed, but while I was making my bed, I told myself, you're going to the Olympics. Then I learned how to organize my stuff. After I learned how to organize my stuff, I learned how to be disciplined. The ability to do good work when I didn't want to do good work at all. For those of you that are in recovery or early recovery, understand this. When the ice cube falls out of the fridge and it hits the ground, my mind says, leave it there or kick it under the fridge. And most people in this world leave it there or kick it under the fridge. I don't leave it there or kick it under the fridge, even though my mind says, leave it there, kick it under the fridge. Here's why. Because my ability to pick the ice cube up and put it in the sink shows up for me in all these other very important areas of my life. Like when I'm having a panic attack and I don't want to call somebody, I call somebody. When I'm not feeling good or something happens in my life and my mind says, I don't want to go to a meeting today, I go to the meeting today because I've learned to pick up the ice cube and put it in the sink. The reason it's working and transferring into other areas of my life is because when the ice cube hits the ground, or when I throw a Q-tip in the trash can, it misses, or when I leave the grocery store, instead of putting the cart in the cart tray, I just want to leave it in the sidewalk. When I overcome all of those very simple thoughts, it shows up in the areas where I need it the most. That's when I need to go to a meeting, when I need to call my sponsor, when I need to get to church, when I need to go to my therapist, when I need to call somebody in my support group. Every time before I take action in an area when I need it the most, my brain says, don't do that. Because I'm a human being. We all experience that. But my ability to do good work when I don't want to do good work at all has been one of the greatest assets in my recovery of 15 years. Because I've learned I just have to do some things even when I don't want to do them, and when I can consistently do that, over time, I get taken to places and given opportunities that many people don't get, not because they're not capable or deserving of it, because they haven't done the work to earn it. I started asking myself the golden question, why do I feel this way? And why every time do I feel this, do I end up doing this? I was controlled by my emotions for 23 years of my life. Impulse. I feel, I do. I feel, I do. But I never thought about that. Then I started thinking about that, because maybe this whole thing isn't you. Maybe you're not the reason I'm this way. Maybe you're not the reason I do this. Maybe I'm the reason I do this. If you go to the rooms, we hear the common denominator. What is it? It's us. Wherever you are, there you are. Wherever you go, there you are. It's you. So I started thinking to myself, what is it about my feelings that control my behavior? It's what led me to the place where I learned to understand my relationship with my father and how it played a role in everything that I was doing. And then I learned how to rewrite the story behind what I told myself when I was 12 years old, so my emotions didn't have the stronghold that they used to have. I still have some impulse problems. I'm a human being, and I'm in recovery. For those of us in recovery, we're a little different than other people. But I've learned to work on myself and be committed to that process, because when I don't, the emotional pressure starts to show up, the resentments start taking place, and I start going back to who I used to be. And that person only knows how to use substances to cope with their experiences. December 13, 2008, I parole prison. December 15th, I meet Agent Mason. He says, "What's your plan?" I said, "I'm going to race BMX professionally." I brought him the cover of the magazine, and I said, "This is the cover of the magazine that I was on. This isn't a joke. I know how to ride a bicycle." I said, I'm going to make it to the Olympics. I'm going to start a program eventually for kids. I'm going to call it the Free Will Project, and I'd like to be a professional speaker and tell my story." He said, "Who brought you here?" I said, "My mom." He said, "Go get her." I said, "You want me to go get my mom and bring her in here?" He said, "Yeah." So I go get my mom. She's met all my principals, all my counselors, all my life. She now gets to meet my parole agent. So she walks into the parole office. She's in the parole office now. She meets Agent Mason. He says, "Ma'am, do you know what your son's telling me he's going to do?" She says, "You talking about riding his bicycle?" He says, "Yeah." He says he's training for the Olympics too, and that he's going to start a nonprofit organization for kids. Oh, and he wants to be a professional speaker. My mom said, "That's right. He's been talking about it for years while he was in prison." He said, "Ma'am, your son's full of shit." He says, "I want you to know that the only reason I brought you in here was so I could tell you to your face, your son's going back to prison within 30 days. I'm going to be the one that arrests him. And you need to know that it's going to be you and your husband's fault for being stupid enough to believe this story." Mom looked at him and said, "I don't think you understand who my son is and know what he can do on a bicycle. I promise you, if he says he's going to the Olympics, he'll be there." Passion and empathy is something that infrastructure in corrections is completely missing. I don't blame Agent Mason for what he said to me, because the infrastructure is what really allowed it. The infrastructure is what taught him that it was okay for him to communicate to somebody like that, in my position of all places. And I also understood why he was communicating to me in the way that he was. He was communicating from a place of fear. We became friends later, and he communicated in a much different way. He had never seen an inmate get out and have such lofty or overzealous goals. And he believed that this was a farce for me to have a place to stay with my mother and father. And so he wanted me to live in a halfway house, like he told my father, because that would be a more stable, humble way for me to make my way back into society, which makes sense. But what he could have said was, "Tony, I've never seen an inmate with these type of goals. My fear is that if these things don't happen, if you're truly working towards these things, that you're going to have to feel failure, and that feeling of failure from these big goals that many people will never be able to achieve because of how lofty they are going to lead you back to a place where you use. So how do I, as your parole agent, support you in this, that if things don't go the way you want them to go, you don't go back to your old ways, because if you do that, I have to arrest you. And if I have to arrest you, I have to put you back in prison." It was simply a change in how he communicated. But that's not his fault. The infrastructure doesn't teach him how to communicate. Infrastructure doesn't teach CEOs how to communicate. Infrastructure doesn't teach law enforcement how to communicate. Their job is simply to do what they were doing at that time, and that was to arrest people and put them in jail. It wasn't to correct anybody. It wasn't to rehabilitate anybody. It was the infrastructure that was lacking completely on their ability to understand who they were working with and how we could change the outcomes of what we were doing. 5 months after that moment, I raced my first professional BMX race I'd ever raced in my life. I took 3rd place. That first year, I won 5 races at the lower pro division. 1 year after being back on my bicycle, I made it to the Olympic level. 1 year after being back on my bicycle, I also picked up a microphone and was invited to the Olympic Training Center by the United States of California, or the United States in California and Chula Vista. My second year on a bicycle, I'm at the Olympic level. I make 6 finals. In October of 2011, though, I blow my knee out, and it ends my racing career. I was completely devastated. The biggest thought that I had at this time when I blew my knee out and these doctors were telling me that I probably wasn't going to get back into racing the way I was that this is why I don't try. This is why I don't care. Because every time I try to do the right thing, something bad happens to me. And this something bad that happens to me just confirms to me that life isn't worth the effort. So just go back to the way you were, because all of this stuff is bull. But for the last 3 years, I was working on changing my belief system from I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able to I can, I will, and I am able, which meant I could experience those old feelings and those old thoughts, accept those, but tell a different story about what I was feeling and what was happening. So I told myself, this happened to you for a very good reason. You just have to figure out what it is. And you can't figure out what it is if you don't keep brushing your teeth, making your bed, organizing your stuff, making it to church on Sundays, Wednesdays, Tuesdays, feeding the homeless on Fridays, making sure that you're getting to meetings, calling your sponsor, and doing everything that you're supposed to do. Over time, if you stay the course, everything that you need to know about why this happened will show up for you. But if you quit and you give up now, you'll never figure that out, and you'll continue to receive what you think you're supposed to be receiving, which isn't what you're supposed to be receiving. So I kept brushing my teeth, making my bed, and organizing my stuff. 6 months later, I started my nonprofit organization. We raised $2,500 our first year. 6 months after that, I started coaching BMX athletes. When I started coaching BMX athletes, I had to coach them for free because nobody believed that I knew what I was doing, and why would they? I just got out of prison, was sleeping on the street, strung out on drugs. What does he know about making athletes faster? So I became willing to do things that other people weren't willing to do, like coach athletes for free to prove that I knew what I was doing. By 2016, my nonprofit organization was raising over $120,000 a year, giving away $40,000 worth of bicycles, $10,000 worth of skateboards. We created one of the coolest after-school programs called BARS, Behavioral and Academic Restoration Through Action Sports. I believe that true prevention was not built on putting a bunch of statistics on a board and scaring kids away from using. It was about connecting through experiences and changing the inner conversation from I can't, I won't, and I'll never be able to I can, I will, and I am able. Because the statistics don't meet the girl who's sexually abused as a child. The statistics don't meet the young man who was sexually abused as a child or grew up in a home where mom and dad were alcoholics and addicts and in and out of prison. The statistics don't meet individuals emotionally. The statistics have no relatability. But through an experience that would bring somebody joy, we could mentor and learn these individual stories, and through compassion and empathy and care, we could help them rewrite the story about what it means to be who they are growing up in the experiences that they're experiencing. It became one of the coolest programs because we were preventing and changing behavior, not by the statistics we taught kids, but by the experience that they had while they were with us. Some of these individuals that started with us when they were 12 years old, they're business owners now. They're fathers. They come to us still in their 20s, early 20s. I'll never forget the time that we had with you getting to ride those bikes. That was it. Prevention was about creating an experience that people could hold on to for the rest of their lives and believe something about themselves that maybe they didn't before. By 2016, I'd coached 2 world champions, 3 national champions, had 25 athletes from Australia to Bolivia. I became one of the biggest coaches in the world for the sport of BMX. In July of 2016, my top female athlete, Brooke Crane, calls me, and she says, pack your bags, Hoff. We're going to the Olympics. In 2016, I became the first human being to start in a prison cell and make it to the Olympics. I just didn't get there as an athlete like I thought I was supposed to be. I got there as a coach. And I tell people, getting there as a coach was way better than being there as an athlete. I don't even have to be there as an athlete to tell you that. Because Brooke had to go to Athlete Village, live in a village, which is basically a hotel room, for a week and eat cafeteria food, stressed out the game from anxiety, because the last 8 years of her life have been about one thing and one thing only. And the only thing we went there for was a medal at the end of that competition that in reality didn't mean anything. I got to be there every morning on the beach with a cup of espresso, writing my letter to God like I did every single morning, and enjoying the experience of what God was able to do in my life, starting in a place where I would throw a sleeping bag to sleep at the high school I graduated from and tell myself, you're going to die soon. To me, the experience was about gratitude. It was about being present in the moment, about how much had changed in my life. It was about looking in the mirror and no longer wanting to kill the person that I saw. It was about being rejected by people and feeling the hurt that comes with rejection, but walking away saying, I don't need everybody to like me. I still have value. Somebody will value me. If this person doesn't value me, that's okay. Somebody does. It was this person that had made it to the Olympics, not by chance, not by luck, but by what I chose to commit myself to, what I chose to surrender myself to. And through my obedience, life has been rewarding more than it has been challenging. I face my challenges every day, but most importantly, when I have a challenge now, I see it as an opportunity to grow. I see it as an opportunity for me to learn something that's going to take me to the next level. The next level for me was starting my treatment center. I'm going to take some questions from you guys, and if you had questions about that, we could talk about that as well. But my life is an open book during this Q&A. I'm happy to take any kind of questions you have. If you're in recovery, early recovery, please don't let this time slip away from you without asking me things about recovery. I don't know everything, but I know how to get it done for 15 years. And I want you to be able to have parts of my recovery in your life. If you have a question, make sure you ask that. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Who has the first question? Could be anything. Somebody's got one. Sure. The most effective coping skill that I have for my mental wellness, because my mental wellness is why I go use, is working out. Working out and service work. So long as I'm serving others and so long as I'm taking care of my anxiety through working out, I find myself at a level of peace that is not overwhelming me, making me want to go use. So if you're early in recovery, you have to find out what those pieces are, but service work has to be involved. Has to be. And I don't think it needs to be in the Rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. I don't think it needs to be you sponsoring individuals. I go to dog shelters because I love dogs. And those dogs make me feel peace when I get to go there and love on them. You have to find what makes you feel peace in serving others. Some people it's animals, some people it's the environment, some people it's other human beings, some people it's geriatrics. You get to choose what that is, and it may be in the rooms. Find that, and then find that personal release for yourself. Like with me being on the road a lot, I don't get to work out much because I'm super tired, but the other thing that I do is go to basketball games. Basketball is still my favorite thing, favorite sport. When I go to basketball games and I get to watch Luka Doncic play live, I feel like a little kid again. Those are coping skills that I've learned to use outside of journaling, breath work, meditation, some of these ones that are more daily instant activities. Make sense? Questions? Sure. Well, how did I learn to balance the bipolar? One, I don't think that I was diagnosed correctly. So when I went into a psychiatrist, I was already under the influence of narcotics. So they saw an impulsive individual that was being controlled by substances. So when I removed the substances from my life, I found out that I do have anxiety, I do have depression, but it's not at clinical levels in which I needed to use medication to help level me out to a point where I wasn't being controlled. So that's where my service work, getting involved in church, building a support team, having a therapist was enough for me to regulate myself from experiencing super highs and super lows. So this is something that you need to work out with your support team is, do I need medication to help manage what I'm experiencing on a daily basis? Some people do, some people don't. It's very specific to yourself, but you have to be honest with yourself at the same time. I always tell people there's two forms of honesty: honesty with self and honesty with others. Honesty with others is really easy. If you drop your wallet, it's easy for me to pick it up and say you dropped your wallet. It's much harder for me to say I don't need the medication, when in reality I'm saying I don't need the medication because I need to co-sign me being impulsive to go use from my emotions. See what I'm saying? It's really attaching yourself to, if you get into the rooms, the motive behind the motive. So, work with people and figure out whether or not you need medication and try to find the right balance. Make sure you speak up if you don't feel like you have that soul. I think I'm over-medicated. Can we try lowering the dose or raising it? Questions? Do I ever get burned out doing what I'm passionate about? For me, no. I do get tired, though. And I do try to schedule in times where I just check out. I was just telling Danny the other day, my birthday. I didn't tell anybody it was my birthday. I'm not a big birthday person, but I made a very intentional decision that somebody that tagged me on Instagram with my birthday, I wouldn't reshare it because I didn't need 30,000 people telling me happy birthday and me feel like I needed a reply. I checked out and I sat at home and I rested because what I needed in that time was rest so I didn't burn out. I think that's what I've learned is the balance between when I know I'm going too hard and I'm slowing down, and then learning to back off, and then knowing when I can push harder. Questions? The self-image of me struggling what I saw in the mirror, was I able to get past that? I wouldn't say I've been able to get past it because it's still there. What I've been able to do is confront it. I would still say that instinctually my belief is I can't, I won't, and I'm not able. But I'm able to get to a place where I can stand face to face with that and say, you're not true. You can, you will, and you are able. And the more I do that, the stronger that belief gets, and that when the other one comes into play, when I see it in the mirror, I don't want to believe it. Does that make sense? And so it's like if you read the Bible, you talk about the spiritual armor, of arming yourselves with these spiritual tools that help you confront this fight that life brings. And that's just something I've learned to accept. I'm okay with the fight. I now want to fight because I realize when we walk out of these rooms, every person in this world is fighting the same fight, but in their own ways. And so what I tell myself about that fight is the most important thing. So I didn't get over it. I've just learned to confront it and change that conversation. Questions? Man, that is a great question. My father heard about it for the first time 3 weeks ago. He came to watch me speak. He came to my TED Talk, which was only 13 minutes long, 14 minutes long. When he decided that he was going to come to my speech, which is a community speech, very similar outline as this, I said, Dad, I just want to forewarn you and Mom that there's going to be some uncomfortable things that you're about to hear. He said, son, I don't care what you say. I understand that I may have played a role in this whole thing. And he listened to it. And, I had to massage it a little bit more. So he didn't feel like I was directing it at him, because it's not my father's fault, right? Every single one of us in here have grown up in a home of dysfunction. There's no such thing as a perfect home in which trauma is not inflicted. Everybody's trauma is specific to themselves. And so when we left there, he was accepting of it. And he understood. And he understands now while I'm telling my parents, you need to retire. All you guys do is work. Your kids are getting older, and I don't want to carry you out of your work in a casket. I want to spend some time with you before you go, So he took it well. It was through hearing through his speech. I thought it was going to be him reading my book that he was actually going to hear about it. But I've gotten to a place where I'm okay with the situation, and I don't want to traumatize my father. My father has taken a lot of blame on himself for what I struggled with when I didn't want him to do that, if that makes sense. Questions? Could be anything. Yeah. He's still sober, so he's got about 6 weeks of sobriety right now, but he's not wanting to go to meetings. He's going to white knuckle it. His relationship status with the baby, the mom, is not great, and so I worry about the guy. But we try to stay in, kind of infrequent touch with him. We don't want to just contacting him, but for what he says, he's sober. So, but if you're not doing what you need to do to keep yourself balanced, it's going to be hard to do over time. Eventually, you fall back onto old systems. Questions? Here, and then we'll go here. So, from a clinical perspective or a personal perspective? Like, how do you suggest or how do you do? Okay, yeah, making sure I want to understand whether you're on what side of the chair you're on. When you suggest, it's really about bringing awareness to what's happening. So what I was taught was, once awareness is brought to the conscious mind, the cognitive mind, there's now, when they do something, they also experience this moment in which they know why they're doing what they're doing. We then give them, instead of doing this, try this. You can't make that person do that, but hopefully if there's consistent contact with the suggester or the person that's helping them, that over time they start adopting those behaviors. Or they start adopting those behaviors, and what we do from a suggestive point is to encourage them to not overwhelm themselves with shame or guilt if they don't get it right. Right? Because if I act out of impulse through abandonment in relationships, I then feel guilty when I inflict trauma on my partner that I didn't want to do. So I've had to learn to not shame myself as a result of my failures to execute what I know I need to do. So I think it comes down to showing them what the behavior is connected to, providing an outlet as a different form of behavior, and then comforting them through missed opportunities or failures until they get it right. Because one of the things I always tell people is the idea that today you're going to stop using and never use again, while it could be true, it's not for many others. So as long as we're making efforts, we're moving towards that healing and that progress that gets us to a place where we, if and when we do, and it's an empowering outcome. Sure. Yeah, sure. Well, my thoughts are expand on accepting therapy and wanting to do that, because a lot of times there's a stigma attached to sitting down with a therapist or even opening up about those experiences. What I've learned for myself is the more honesty in which I communicate in my safe space, the better the suggestions or the communication from the other side of the chair gets. And so I've gotten to a point where I almost just spill everything, because what I know from spilling everything is that I can clean up the mess once the person on the other side of the chair gets to see what my mess actually looks like. There was a joke. I worked for this treatment center years ago, and one thing I wanted to do was go through their clinical process before I was willing to work with this treatment center. So I sat down with this therapist. I did an hour. It felt like 10 minutes. And a week later, the guy died. And I came into the office, and all the people that worked there were like, Hoff, you killed the guy. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, he died, bro. He had a session with you, and you overwhelmed him, and he died. And it's a joke because I'm so willing to just tell the therapist everything, because I recognize if I don't tell him everything, I receive nothing. You're just wasting your time if you're going to go in there and give just bits and pieces. And so rigorous honesty of self and others is so important for me in a therapeutical sense, in a clinical sense. Questions? Yep. I did. I do have a treatment center. It's called PH Wellness. It's located in Southern California, Southeast California, in Riverside County. We have a 4-acre property, 18 beds, 3 houses. It's co-ed. We accept dogs, and we're actually developing a cool, we handle relationships, so we'll bring couples in. We have therapists that work well with couples and try and create better dynamics for couples. One of the cool things that we're doing is, one of my business partners is a very successful fitness center owner, and we implemented fitness into our program. So we have a very strong daily fitness component, and then our other business partner, thing that's great about him is he's the half owner of a $1 billion staffing agency. So what we're able to do is, if individuals continue outside of residential and PHP care and move into IOP, we have a world-class career center in which we can place them into real careers with $21 an hour, 401ks, healthcare benefits, and the best thing about it is, if you have a felony on your record, doesn't matter. We can still get you those jobs. So what we're trying to do is kind of challenge the status quo of what treatment really looks like, and say the aftercare component really is about creating opportunities which people can begin to be a part of society without that stigma being so heavy that they just end up giving up and going back to their old behaviors. So we created a really cool program. We've been open now for 4 months. We're working through all of the bugs and tweaks and things that need to be made on a treatment center. It's not very easy. But we're committed to that process. So, yeah, PH Wellness. So right now it's private insurance, and cash pay is how we have things set up. But our goal is to have a setup in which we can work with the local community in which we're housing, our houses are, but then have a bigger reach across the United States, where we have scholarship programs and stuff that are available individuals that may not have insurance or cash to get in. That's one thing that's very close to my heart is that treatment centers are very lucrative, and that owners are probably taking far more than they need to take when you could help other people in ways that would make your brand even more powerful. Questions in the back? I never stayed at a transition house or a halfway house. My transition house was mom and dad's, and then my support group was a lot of the racers that I was racing with around the United States. They really huddled around me and were kind of a traveling safe space, if that makes sense. But I do not recommend anybody leave treatment and not go to sober living. I've recognized that if you do not have a stable and safe environment to go home to, that you should be stabilizing yourself for at least 6 months in a sober living environment where there's accountability. One thing I heard from Seth is that Oxford houses are very popular around here, which I think is absolutely great. Programs with high levels of structure and accountability are when human beings thrive, especially people in early recovery. If you can get into one of those homes, I believe you exponentially increase the odds of you getting it because of what those houses are structured like. Question? In what ways is Tony still growing? Working through abandonment is my biggest one. Abandonment. I really have hit my head against the wall so much with my abandonment. And so the biggest way that I'm growing right now is continuing to try and work on the abandonment that started when I was 12 years old, because it shows up in my relationships with females. Time and time and time and time again. I don't know how many relationships I have just gotten the gas can, poured every bit of gasoline on the relationship, and said, watch me light it on fire. I'm being vulnerable right now. I have self-destructed so many relationships. That is the biggest area of growth that just keeps, my girlfriend sometimes, soon-to-be fiance, she says, I don't understand. Like, you have done things that normal human beings cannot do, but you can't seem to figure this trust thing out. Man, I don't trust anybody. By shake of hands, okay, I know you. But I got to be around you. And even if I'm around you, the back of my mind says, there's a good chance that you can't trust them. Because of so many things that I've been through, especially being homeless, that have made me believe people can't be trusted. Females especially can't be trusted. And I don't know, hold on. That's a belief. Not me saying that's true. And I'm having to try and rewrite that. And man, we're going to sit down and try couples therapy, because single therapy is, and a lot of it is stemming from, my abandonment. So that's the biggest area that Tony's trying to grow, continually trying to grow along spiritual lines if you're in the program, because I know the stronger my spirituality, the more I'm able to manage situations, because it really comes down to perspective. And then growing my brand and how I'm able to make an impact around the United States, how I'm able to help people find sobriety and peace within themselves. That will continue to grow as well. Yeah. Questions? Sure. Yeah. Sure. Sure. I don't know if you all heard that, but he's in early recovery, has trouble with trust. How do you unload on somebody without, maybe giving them too much? You don't want them to feel sorry for you. It's just an overwhelming feeling, I think, maybe what you're expressing, to give somebody all of your stuff. Sure. So I think the most important part is to find where your safe space is. Number one, find your safe space. Number two, if you're in a safe space, the other person will probably be able to communicate boundaries, which means, okay, we're going to stop right there. Like, we're going too far. How about we just stay here and focus on this piece? Next time we can start adding in more. Third thing is, if it's your safe space, there may not be limits to how much you can divulge, because the safe space understands that it comes down to how much you're able to give up and surrender that determines how far you go in this thing called recovery or sobriety, right? So really what I think you need to do is find that person. Then you need to understand that nobody needs to feel sorry for you. And if you're in a safe space, I'm not going to feel sorry for you. I'm going to feel with you. Well, yeah, because my job's not to feel sorry for you if I'm in your safe space. My job is to feel with you, right? And then tell you that I'm sorry you had to experience that. I know that must have been difficult for you. You could say, yeah, it was, right? I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me, but if I recognize that somebody feels with me and understands what I felt, then we're making a connection in which I feel understood, I feel safe, and I feel like I can give you the things that I've never been able to give somebody else. My last piece of advice for this is, if the person you try to create a safe space with does not become a safe space, move on. Go find the next person. We don't always find our safe space immediately, and that's okay. It doesn't mean people can't be trusted. It means that's not the person that's for you. And not every sponsor is the one that you should be getting sponsored by. Okay? Questions? Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Great question. First time I was confronted with that was year 9. It took a long time for me to actually have that urge. And it really wasn't an urge, it was a survival instinct. So I was engaged and I cheated on the girl. A mistake that I told Seth last night that I never even made when I was under the influence. So this was a big mistake for me. She kicks me out of the house, rightfully so, but a week later she's on vacation with our roommate who I moved into the house to get sober. She gets married and has 3 kids with this guy. Not only is there shame, guilt, and anxiety from the mistake that I made, but there's also this deep abandonment and this deep betrayal that I'm feeling from this guy that I helped, that I'm overwhelmed with these uncomfortable emotions. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I'm losing weight. The only thing I could do was go to sleep to Tony Evans' sermons, go to meetings 3 times a day, move somebody into my house that I was living alone with. This was a friend who was going to college, needed a place to stay, and I said, I will let you stay at my house rent-free if you're willing to just listen to me talk at any hour if I need to talk. I said, I could do that, because they were up all night studying. I would literally come out of the bedroom sometimes at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and I just needed to vomit. Every feeling of hatred, every feeling of jealousy, every feeling of shame, every feeling of guilt, because the more I held on to it, the more it just felt like I was self-destructing and I was going to explode. And so what I did was I fell back on the system that I created. The system I created of support, the system I created of vulnerability, the system I created of picking up the ice cube and putting it in the sink, even when I didn't want to do it, or that was most of the time. Right? And so I created this system by year 9 that was so strong that when I was tested, I was willing to do the things that I needed to do that over time I knew were going to get me safe. And that's what I did. I did that, and over time, it took me over a year to forgive myself for that. One of the things that I said to the therapist was all of this stuff that was happening because it was right at that time. And he was like, dude, stop. Like, you need to forgive yourself. And I'm like, how? I don't know how. I'm trying. And forgiving myself really came down to what I did on a daily basis that proved I was no longer the person that made that mistake. And so something in life is going to happen. I don't know what it is, but you know it. And it's going to come down to what you do today. It's not about what you do in that moment, because what you do in that moment is what you know how to do. So today what you do is teaching yourself what you're going to do when you get to that moment. It's no different than me brushing my teeth to get to the Olympics. Getting to the Olympics was not about me being a world-class coach 6 years from that moment.
It was me being a world-class person of taking care of what needed to be done that day to earn that. So what you do today and what you do tomorrow is what's going to show up when you have that life event that's going to make you feel all that stuff that made you use in the first place. And from there, you have a decision. Do I do what I know takes me to healing, or do I do what I did in the past that takes me to self-destruction? That's right. That's what I said. Questions? Yep. Yep. Detrimental or important? Both. Okay? Sure. Sure. Are you talking about my treatment center? I don't know that I can say that we're more successful than any other treatment centers. I wouldn't stand up here and tell you I have the best treatment center in the world. Anybody that does that, I think, is a liar. We do what we do, and we help very few people in comparison to the people that come in, right? When it comes to closing down psychiatric facilities for youth, I'm not for it. I'm also not for not having facilities for adults. Me being a native from California, I can tell you right now that we have absolutely let homeless people take over the state. They sleep on sidewalks, they sleep under the freeways, they sleep in front of your businesses, and they've taken complete control. And California has basically decriminalized drug use and certain levels of crime to a certain degree that we can't even put individuals breaking the law into correctional facilities. The reason that I bring that up is because I believe the pendulum swings back and forth, right? And right now, the pendulum is swinging really far to the left when it comes to ideas about individuals with mental health, substance use, and homeless populations. And some of this pendulum, as it swings left, really is no different than when the pendulum swings right. When it swings right, it says that every person who's breaking the law or sleeping on the street should be put in jail and housed there and removed from society that way. When we do that, we remove our moral responsibility to help this individual's situation. When it swings left, we make a decision that these are human beings that should be able to make a decision that they make, and we have this overwhelming compassion, or we feel sorry for how they were raised, what they were missing in their homes, or these things that have happened in their lives, and so we must let them be. Well, letting them be also removes your moral responsibility to help their situation. And so I don't support removing or closing facilities, because those facilities, if we add in the components of what we're learning, and we add in more structure, and we add in certain things, we can say, well, you don't get a choice to go to class or not today. You're going. And then on the adult side, we should recognize that some individuals are struggling with such acute mental health struggles, personality disorders, psychosis that may not be from drug-induced psychosis, is that they belong in facilities. And that our moral responsibility should actually be to take care of them in a facility for the rest of their lives, where if they're not able to stabilize themselves, we stabilize them, because we recognize them on the streets in the cold, in the heat, without food, water, shelter, and using substances to treat themselves is not what we should be doing. So I don't support it, but I also think that the facilities, as you said, may give way to certain behaviors that aren't conducive to the person. But on the other side, nothing's perfect. We just do what we can. Questions? Last question? Could be anything. Okay, you guys, you can find me on social media, on Instagram. We're at.
Go ahead. Yep. Sure. 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 The key to most of it has been my faith in Christ. So what God tells me about me and what I'm capable of doing supersedes the opinion of anybody else. So I've heard I'm crazy a lot. And so did Noah. You know, Noah was crazy and then it started raining. Well, now he's not so crazy, right? Tony was crazy and then he made it to the Olympics. Well, and now he's not so crazy, right? So faith has been really the grounding technique for me to continue forward without focusing too much on external factors. What my faith says about me, what my faith says I should do with what I was given is the most important thing. The second thing is just making sure I'm around people who are focused on personal growth and growth in groups. It doesn't have to be getting to the Olympics as a growth. It could be just getting over your abandonment. If you're a person that's focused on getting over your abandonment to a full extent, to me, you're no different than me wanting to start a multi-million-dollar facility in Texas. We're both being driven by this want to do something greater, to become a better person. So what I did was I started selecting people that were the complete opposite of what my instinct said. For example, I was in prison, Tehachapi State Prison, and my neighbor, he says, Hoff, why do you think you're so much better than everybody else? And I was kind of confused. I was like, what? Because I didn't feel that way. And he goes, you never want to hang out with us. And I was like, well, actually, I think you guys are funny. I'm up here laughing on my bunk all the time at the jokes you guys are saying when you're right next to me. But I know that if I start hanging out with you guys, there's a certain dynamic in my personality that'll start coming out, and I may start slipping back into my old behaviors, and it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with the way I operate. What I learned was the person that I originally want to be friends with is not it's not the healthiest person for me to want to be friends with if this is what I want to do with my life. So I started thinking to myself, why is it that I don't want to be friends with this person, but I want to be friends with this person? Why can't I be an acquaintance of this person? Because every human being should be treated fairly, but associate more deeply with this person and learn about what it is that they have and find out on the other side that these individuals actually have what I'm trying to accomplish. And that's that personal, I just want to be better, right? I always tell people in meetings, you better make sure that you pick the right people, because in these meetings, not everybody's trying to get sober. Sometimes the first person we want to pick to be sober buddies with is the first person we want to get high with. So for me, it was about making sure that I'm picking people that are focused on growth and just staying around them, and then letting my own personal ambitions be personal to me and not need to be everybody else's ambitions as well. That makes sense. Yeah. You guys can find me on social media, Instagram, Tony M. Hoffman. I have a podcast with about 100 episodes called One Choice. It's on Spotify, Google Podcasts, and iTunes. Facebook, Tony Hoffman Speaking. You can reach out to me at any time on social media if you have other questions or looking for a piece of advice at any time in your journeys, and I'm happy to share that with you. I make myself accessible. Thank you, Danny, for bringing me into your community. I really appreciate it. Thank y'all.
Tony, we can't thank you enough for coming to Dodge City, Kansas, in the middle of nowhere. But, God bless you for all you continue to do and you've done for our clients and staff. corrections, everybody. Thanks to Compass. Thank the Southwest Kansas Community Foundation for making this possible. And again, it's all about you. It has nothing to do with us. So thank you all for your time.